could range 1,000 miles out to sea to scout for convoys. When used to bomb shipping, the Condors sank 30 ships. This partnership with U-boats was never properly exploited. But Dönitz did exploit the fact that German naval intelligence had broken the British codes.
We were aware that the intelligence for some reason was good, but I myself put this down to very superior hydrophone equipment that the submarines had, that the U-boats had in their boats, probably being able to pick up the noise of a convoy's propellers up to 80 or even 100 miles. But in addition, I know that they would place their U-boats in a line across at right angles to the expected line of the convoy. And this line, for say 5 U-boats, could be 100 miles from end to end. And so with good hydrophones, very little disguise of the position of a convoy could be effected. It was only after the war that we knew that they were breaking the codes and that they knew very well the time of leaving port that the convoys had and how many escorts and how many merchant ships in each.
The Royal Navy, searching for U-boats underwater, had pinned its faith on Aztec, an echo-sounding device. U-boats were attacking convoys on the surface. The Navy was not prepared for this.
Convoy defense is not a very glamorous affair, and between the wars, I think rather naturally, the Navy were inclined to concentrate more on more glamorous activities like great massed torpedo attacks and that sort of thing. All the information about the lessons of World War I were available, and for those who wanted to read them, all the lessons were there. But I'm afraid no one bothered, and as a result, trade defense as a whole was very badly neglected.
The neglect continued. In the early days, convoys could only be escorted for about 300 miles from each Atlantic coast. There just weren't enough escort ships. Those available lacked endurance and their crews were virtually untrained.
My officers were with the one. The other two were Canadian staff lieutenants, both of the age of between 20 and 21, who would come from Canada as passengers, and that was their seagoing experience. The heads of department were regulars. Some of them had retired and called back, and there were 2 or 3 seamen who were of bucket service, and the rest were straight in.
Air cover was to prove all important. But surprisingly, the Navy's carriers did not at first supply it. That task went to the RAF, although Coastal Command.
With the exception of the Sunderland flying boats, a very small number, all the other aircraft, except the ensign, were lash-ups. They were borrowed from entirely dissimilar functions in order to do this job in Coastal Command. Secondly, the navigation aids were not there. It was entirely dead reckoning navigation. And whereas an experienced navigator can look at the sea and estimate the wind and where he's likely to be in an hour's time, this is very difficult for a new boy. And since the point to be navigated to, the convoy, was often equally at error, it was no wonder that we failed to meet any convoys. So lack of equipment, lack of training, and unsuitable aircraft were certainly severe handicaps at the beginning of the war.
What is more, cooperation between the Navy and the Air Force in the field as well as at sea was only very bad indeed, mainly due to stupid quarrels between senior officers in Whitehall. It took nearly 2 years before we did anything like the right sort of cooperation between ships and aircraft. It was a disgrace and a tragedy. So many ships were sunk and so many lives were lost unnecessarily during those first few years.
So seamen suffered from quarrels at Whitehall, from the U-boats, and from the sea.
Now, by popular request of the Seamen's Mess Deck, the Western Approach's signature tune.
Someone's rocking my dream home. Someone's invading my dream. We were sailing along. He's going on. Suddenly something went wrong.
It's very, very hard to describe to someone on the land after a tough convoy. By tough, I mean bad weather, especially in the winter time. What just over 2 weeks at sea is, living on corned beef and hardtack. And this is, it's not a fallacy. We used to do this quite often when the seas come in and put the galley fires out, and you couldn't just cook anything hot. The lucky ones had hammocks, and the unfortunate ones had to lie on the lockers, and it was very discomforting. You used to get chaps coming down from the middle watch, 4 o'clock, wet through, just clambering on the locker. They would get soaked. There was no hygiene there. We really started smelling after about a week if you didn't watch it. We had a feeling that it was a necessary job. I'm not so sure that we realised that it was all that important. To us, it was a very boring job. We were on lookout for anything that might come up, and it was bitterly cold. It was an open bridge, open to all weathers, and it was more really trying to keep warm, trying to keep the cold out, trying to keep dry, rather than realise that we were doing an important job.
But they were doing an important job. They brought the cargoes without which Britain could not have kept going.
Then you sit down in cabin. That's when you really think. Now we're in the open sea. We can catch a packet any moment.
There was many times that we saw little lights in the water and we assumed that these were survivors, but we couldn't stop and pick them up.
The normal comparison that seamen made with their wage for the hours that they worked was with the ammunition workers, who were making a fabulous amount of money with no more risks than our housewives left at home.
We lost 1 out of every 3 men. And without them, this nation wouldn't have survived more than 3-4 months.
But the Germans were still celebrating. In the first half of 1941, they sank nearly 3 million tons of shipping. Ships were harder to replace than cargoes. If they could be sunk faster than they could be built, Britain would starve. Now the Canadian Navy, tiny as the outbreak of war, was expanded 50 times its original size. It would take over nearly half the burden of convoy escort in the North Atlantic. More and more convoys were leaving Canada. Decks laden with tanks, holds full of supplies from the neutral United States under lease lend. Alarmed at continuing losses, the British War Cabinet set up a new Western Approaches Command to reorganize convoy defense. For the first time, the RAF and the Navy worked closely together. And in March 1941, Dönitz lost 3 of his ablest men. Gunther Prien, who had sunk the Royal Oak at Scapa Flow. Depth charged. Joachim Schipke, rammed and drowned. And Kretschmer, depth charged to the surface. And taken prisoner. Only 1/3 of Dönitz's fleet could be on patrol at any one time. His best captains had suddenly gone. Now he could only keep some half-dozen U-boats at sea.
With this small number of U-boats, of course, any decisive success in the Battle of the Atlantic was not possible.
Could range 1,000 miles out to sea to scout for convoys. When used to bomb shipping, the Condors sank 30 ships in 2 months.
But I myself put this down to very superior hydrophone equipment that the submarines had, that the U-boats had in their boats. Probably being able to pick up the noise of a convoy's propellers up to 80 or even 100 miles. But in addition, I know that they would place their U-boats in a line across at right angles to the expected line of the convoy. And this line, for say 5 U-boats, could be 100 miles from end to end. And so with good hydrophones, very little disguise of the position.
This partnership with the U-boats was never properly exploited. But Dönitz did exploit the fact that German naval intelligence had broken the British codes.
We were aware that the intelligence for some reason was good of a convoy could be effective. It was only after the war that we knew that they were breaking the codes and that they knew very well the time of leaving port that the convoys had and how many escorts and how many merchant ships in each.